It's just after noon when the sweltering heat of the city begins to shimmer off the pavement like waves of invisible fire, and in the heart of a bustling financial district surrounded by glass towers and luxury boutiques, a hunched figure wrapped in a tattered beige coat dares to step into the gleaming path of a polished man in a navy blue Brioni suit, his shoes clicking crisply on the sidewalk as his Bluetooth earpiece glows red. He's in the middle of a deal worth millions, and every second he breathes is money. So, when the homeless old woman gently reaches out her trembling, cracked hand and whispers, "Excuse me, sir, could you spare some change for food?" The man stops as if slapped, slowly turns toward her, his perfectly sculpted face taut with irritation, lips curled in disgust, and eyes like chips of stone as he snarls, "You have the nerve to stand in front of me like this. Do you know who I am?" And with a huff of breath so cold it could frost the sun, he sneers loudly enough for the crowd outside the cafe to hear. "You people always have excuses. Look at you. You reek of failure." His voice dripping condescension as he brushes past her like she's nothing more than smoke. And she staggers slightly still, holding out her hand, though now it trembles more from shame than hunger. Her eyes shimmering with unfallen tears that reflect the mirrored windows of the buildings that surround her, like silent judges towering over a life discarded. Her name is Etta Mae Gardner. 74 years old, African-American, formerly a literature professor at a small historically black college in the South, before a stroke took half her mobility and a predatory bank foreclosed on her home, while she recovered before her only son died in a car crash while returning from a third job, meant to help keep her afloat and before her body began to betray her in tiny, cruel increments. Knees that ache in the morning, fingers that refuse to curl around warm cups, eyes that blur names on signs and pills, and skin that the city air seems to chew through. But beneath the layers of filth and age and a mat of white knotted hair is the same woman who once stood in front of classrooms, who once recited Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, with a voice that stirred even the most hardened souls. And though the world has forgotten her name, though her credentials have yellowed in some locked file cabinet back in Georgia, though her skin bears the sun's merciless mark, and her spirit is frayed from sleeping under bridges and behind dumpsters, there is still a flicker of unbowed grace in the way she holds herself still. A quiet defiance in how she refuses to scream even now, as people avert their eyes as the barista inside the cafe laughs behind her latte and murmurs, "Some people just don't know their place." Etta doesn't move, not yet, because for a moment she imagines the face of her grandson, the only grandchild she's never met. The child her son never got to hold the baby. She knows is out there somewhere in the world, and she wonders if he would recognize her in this state, or if he would be ashamed too, and that thought nearly buckles her knees, so she leans against the side of a marble fountain where koi fish circle silently, as indifferent as the wealthy passers-by who won't stop for her, won't meet her eyes, won't even pause their phone calls to acknowledge her humanity. But then something shifts behind her. The man in the Brioni suit suddenly halts mid-step phone, dropping from his ear, bouncing once on the pavement, and his posture tightens like a man struck dumb by memory. Because in the open plaza behind the fountain, an enormous screen mounted to a building lights up with a breaking news segment showing a photo. And it's her face, not today's weathered version, but the young, proud, scholarly Etta from decades ago, in a black and white portrait taken when she became the first black woman to earn a Ph.D. in comparative literature from a prestigious Ivy League school. And the announcer's voice rings clear as it says, In honor of Black History Month, we remember trailblazers like Dr. Etta Mae Gardner, who dedicated her life to education and activism, and the air stills, the cafe, chatter quiets, and the rich man's expression curdles from confusion to horror as he whirls around to look again at the old woman he just humiliated, and realization spreads across his face like a slow burn. He had dismissed a living legend, and now the crowd that once ignored her begins to whisper, their phones raised, filming, sharing, gasping. Is that really her? Someone breathes. I read her books in college, another says, and then, one by one, people begin to approach timidly. At first, offering water bottles, money, apologies, and questions, as the man in the Brioni suit fumbles for words, finally stammering. I didn't know. I didn't recognize. But Etta, with a slow, deliberate motion, straightens her spine as much as she can, and looks at him with eyes that have outlasted empires, and replies with quiet dignity. You shouldn't need to recognize someone to treat them like a person. Her voice is raspy from the years, but it carries like gospel through the stunned plaza. And in that moment the man crumbles not in body, but in posture, in presence, in the arrogance that had once filled the air around him like smog, now replaced with shame, and he falls silent as reporters begin to arrive, as hashtags begin to trend, as the world takes note of the fallen queen in their midst, and within days an outpouring of support floods in interviews. GoFundMe campaigns, students from decades past writing tributes, even universities offering to name scholarships in her honor. And though Etta accepts the help with grace, what matters most to her is the young man who steps from the crowd 1 week later, holding a photo of a boy with her son's smile and her own eyes, saying, I think you're my grandma. And when she pulls him into her arms, weeping, not from pain, but from the relief of finally being seen, of being found, of being loved again. The city holds its breath, and somewhere in the hush is a lesson scorched into concrete and conscience that dignity has no price tag. That legacy can never be measured in fabric or coin, and that sometimes the ones we dismiss most cruelly are the ones whose names we'll one day beg to remember. And as Etta Mae Gardner wraps her frail arms around the young man whose name is Jordan Ellis, 24 years old, an artist and nonprofit worker who had been searching for clues about his father's side of the family since he turned 18, the world continues watching. But Etta no longer feels like a spectacle, no longer feels invisible, no longer feels like an afterthought left to decay in the shadow of luxury and pride. Because now her story is being rewritten in real time, not by reporters or politicians or social media influencers trying to ride the wave, but by the quiet, meaningful moments that follow the way Jordan holds her hand when they cross the street guiding her. Not because she's weak, but because he's proud the way students from all over the country write letters, thanking her for paving roads. They now walk freely on, and the way a local school, once notorious for excluding black voices from its curriculum, now holds a public ceremony where they rename the library the Dr. Etta Mae Gardner Center for Justice and Literature, and invite her to speak a microphone placed gently before her, as the same city that once turned its back now rises to its feet. She clears her throat, her voice stronger than it's been in years, and begins. There was a time when my hunger was ignored, when my body was judged, and when my worth was buried under wrinkles and dirt. But I never stopped believing that truth in time finds its way to the light. The audience is silent, transfixed, tears welling in the eyes of young and old alike. And when she steps down from the podium, a line of children is waiting, books in hand, eager to hear her read. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale, Hurston Baldwin, and Etta sits in a circle of life, legacy, and laughter, rediscovering the fire in her voice as each child leans closer. Meanwhile, the rich man in the Brioni suit, whose name is Nathaniel Prescott, heir to a real estate empire, watches from the back of the room. His presence quiet, his face unshaven, his suit replaced by jeans and a sweater, his eyes shadowed with the weight of reckoning. He doesn't try to speak to her that day. Not yet. Instead, he leaves behind a letter, an apology not only to her, but to every person he stepped over, every name he never bothered to learn, every story he dismissed because it wasn't wrapped in silk or sealed in profit. The letter goes viral. Yes, but it's what follows that matters more. Nathaniel sells off a series of properties, converting them into transitional housing for homeless elders, including one named the Gardner House, and quietly funds a literacy program in her name. Etta, upon hearing this, only nods once and says, "A start." Because for her justice isn't just about apologies, it's about action. And now, with her grandson at her side, a rebuilt community behind her, and a city finally learning from its own reflection. Etta Mae Gardner walks forward not as a victim of injustice, but as a living monument to resilience, intellect, and unshakable dignity. And so, when the cold wind returns in winter and other homeless women huddle in alleys, a new volunteer program sends jackets, food, and handwritten notes bearing her name. And when the tourists walk past the corner where she was once humiliated, they pause at the plaque installed there, not to gawk, but to remember. Because the city knows now a society is measured not by the height of its towers, but by how it treats the ones it thought had no place inside them. Weeks pass, then months, and with each passing day, Etta Mae Gardner becomes not just a name in headlines or a fleeting symbol of redemption, but a steady beating presence in the city's conscience. She moves into a modest apartment in a renovated brownstone Unit 3A of the newly christened Gardner House, where sunlight spills through lace curtains and a battered bookshelf groans under the weight of Baldwin Du Bois' Toni Morrison and her own handwritten journals the first night she sleeps in a real bed again. She doesn't cry. She just stares at the ceiling and whispers, "Thank you, God. I remember who I am now." But she doesn't stop there. Every Friday afternoon she and Jordan walk together to the old park near the business district, the same one where she once scavenged half-eaten sandwiches and tucked herself behind the fountain to escape cold winds. Now she stands on a folding stool beside Jordan's easel as he paints portraits of the people others overlook: the janitor with a limp, the woman who sings to herself on the bench, the boy who sells oranges at the corner in rain or shine. Etta reads aloud while he paints, her voice shaking the silence like gospel. Her words aren't loud, but they carry. They say we are invisible, she says, as a crowd gathers like leaves in the breeze, but we are the thread that holds this city together. Videos of her readings spread, but this time not for shock value. People share them to feel something again. Her presence becomes a kind of quiet resistance, a proof that history does not erase those who speak truth, only those who remain silent. Even city officials take notice. The mayor invites her to speak at a council meeting. She declines. At first, "I've had my say," she tells Jordan. But Jordan looks at her and says, "Maybe. But we haven't had enough of it." So she agrees, and the night of the speech the chambers overflow. Etta enters not with a cane, but with her grandson's steady arm. And when she speaks, she does not talk of vengeance or blame. She speaks of dignity and how easily it is stripped away by indifference. She speaks of hunger, not just for food, but for acknowledgement, for respect, for a chance to sit at the table. I was one of the lucky ones, she says, slowly, looking around the marble room because someone remembered. But too many sisters and brothers still sleep on sidewalks with doctorates in their pockets and stories in their throats. The room is silent when she finishes, then thunderous applause. A new city initiative is born that night. The Gardner Project aimed at restoring not just homes, but lives by connecting displaced seniors with mentorship opportunities, scholarships, and health care. Etta becomes its beating heart, not a token face, but an active force. She interviews applicants herself. She reads every letter. She remembers every name. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Prescott, the man who once spat disdain into her face, becomes her most unlikely partner. He appears beside her at events now, not as a savior, but as a student, a man still unlearning decades of blindness. At one such event, a young woman asks Etta, "How did you find the strength to forgive Etta?" Smiles gently. "Baby, forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let it define you." She doesn't claim to be perfect, doesn't pretend she never harbored anger, but she channels it. She teaches others how to do the same. By the end of the year, Etta is nominated for a National Humanitarian Award. She travels by train. She never liked flying to Washington, D.C., where she gives a speech in front of 1,000 people. They say, "I was homeless." She tells the crowd, her voice steady, "But I was never without value, never without history, never without hope." The room weeps. Jordan weeps. Even Nathaniel weeps. And when she steps down, cameras flash, reporters swarm, and Etta chuckles. Well, now isn't this something? But the real reward comes weeks later in a quiet letter from a young woman who wrote, "I was going to give up. Then I saw your video. I got up, I applied for school. I start next month. Thank you, Dr. Gardner. You saved me." Etta reads it aloud on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in her armchair by the window. Sunlight pouring over her lap. She places the letter next to a growing box of them and smiles. "Legacy," she whispers. "That's what this is." And far below her window, the city hums. Horns. Honk, people, rush, pigeons scatter. But somewhere in that noise, something has changed. The city listens now, it sees. Because one homeless grandmother with nothing left to lose reminded the world what humanity is worth. And the seasons turn again, spring bleeding into summer. And with it a new rhythm finds its way into Etta Mae Gardner's life. One filled not with survival, but with purpose, grace, and echoes of the legacy she now actively shapes each day. Jordan, now her shadow and her pride, has begun work on a public mural, a towering wall near the subway entrance where she once begged for change. The mural, titled "Still I Rise," captures Etta in full glory. One image of her as the homeless elder wrapped in a torn coat beneath city scaffolding, and beside it, a triumphant portrait of her standing tall, book in hand, hair haloed in gold and eyes burning with wisdom. The entire neighborhood watches it come to life, brush stroke by brush stroke. And as Jordan paints, Etta reads poetry to school kids who sit cross-legged on the sidewalk. Their lunch boxes open their eyes wide. Teachers begin bringing full classes to sit by her side. Not because it's part of any official curriculum, but because the children listen. They feel her words. They remember them. One morning, a limousine pulls up across the street. A polished man in a tailored gray suit steps out holding a leather-bound folder. It's a representative from a major publishing house. "Dr. Gardner," he says, nervous despite his polished appearance. "We'd like to publish your story, your journals." your speeches. The world needs them. Etta smiles softly, eyes narrowing with both humor and caution. And what changed your mind? She asks. The man fidgets. The world changed, ma'am. You helped change it. She considers this not because she needs validation, but because she's wary of the same machine that once erased her. Finally, she nods. Only if I get to approve every word, and half the proceeds go to shelters. The real ones. The forgotten ones. The deal is signed that same week. And when her memoir, Unseen No More, is released 3 months later, it rockets up bestseller lists. Not because of viral fame, but because it speaks truth in a voice that cannot be ignored. In it, she writes, I was not rescued, I was remembered. And in that remembering, I rose. Interviews flood in, but Etta remains grounded. She refuses to do television appearances unless they include a segment highlighting others still on the streets. I won't be your miracle without showing the misery that still breathes outside. She tells producers. She attends town halls, joins panels on racial justice, and meets with city leaders. Not as a guest, but as an advisor. Her insight reshapes how urban homelessness is documented, how housing assistance is distributed, and how dignity is protected. Still, in the quiet hours, she walks the same streets she once slept on. She stops at benches, stoops alleys, and speaks with those still cast aside. She knows their names, their stories. She hands out more than sandwiches. She hands out the truth that no one is disposable. Nathaniel Prescott, now months into his penance, turned purpose, continues to learn under her watch. He opens a second Gardner house in another borough and publicly steps down from his father's corporate board. You're not falling, Etta tells him one afternoon. You're finally standing. He nods, eyes glossy. It's strange. He admits, I've never felt more human. She places a hand on his shoulder. That's because for the first time you're seeing all of us. And then, one autumn morning, just as the leaves begin to curl and fall, a knock sounds at Etta's door. Jordan opens it to find an older woman, Asian, impeccably dressed, but with tears in her eyes. Is this Dr. Gardner's home? She asks. When Etta appears, the woman kneels. You don't remember me, but 35 years ago I was your student. ESL, I barely spoke English. You stayed after class every day. You told me I mattered. You said I would bloom. She pulls a small velvet box from her coat. Inside is a golden pin, the National Medal of Teaching Excellence. They gave it to me last week. I came to give it to you, because without you there'd be no me. Etta is too stunned to speak. Her fingers tremble as she holds the metal child. She finally whispers, voice cracked with awe, You bloomed into a garden. They hold each other for a long time, and Jordan watches from the side, overwhelmed, a single tear tracing down his cheek. That night, Etta sits at her window again, staring out at a city whose lights no longer feel distant. The plaque outside her building catches the lamplight. Her name gleams in brass. But more than that, her impact shimmers in the lives she's touched. And as she watches a group of young volunteers helping an old man with a walker across the street, she smiles. Not a sad smile, not a bitter one, but one full of the hard-earned joy of someone who was thrown away by the world, and came back to rebuild it. Slowly, she closes her journal for the evening and writes one last line across the page. They called me forgotten, but I became unforgettable. And so, time, like an old jazz record, spins softly into the future. And while Etta Mae Gardner's voice continues to echo through the city's schools council halls and hearts, it is Jordan Ellis, her grandson, who now carries the torch lit by her pain, wisdom, and rebirth. At 25, Jordan finds himself no longer just the boy who painted his grandmother's mural, but a community artist with a mission. After the success of Still I Rise, he receives commissions from nonprofits and schools across the state, but he turns many of them down. "I don't want to paint on walls that stay clean while people sleep in dirt outside them," he tells his agent. Instead, he launches the Legacy Colors Project, a mobile mural initiative that travels across low-income neighborhoods, shelters, and prisons, painting forgotten heroes on blank walls and peeling fences. Every brushstroke comes with a conversation. Every finished portrait is revealed with poetry, often read by Ida herself, her voice still warm as molasses and sharp as truth. But change never comes without resistance. One day, while painting a mural of a former black female firefighter who died saving children from a housing project fire, Jordan is approached by a group of city inspectors. This wall wasn't authorized. They bark, "Take it down, or we'll fine you." The confrontation grows heated. Jordan holds his ground. He calls Etta. She shows up 20 minutes later. No longer frail, but carried by community. People gather. Phones. Record. The elderly woman in her head wrap and handmade shawl steps between Jordan and the officials and says, "Tell me, sirs, what permits were needed to paint over our lives in silence all these years?" The crowd erupts. The officials back down. A councilwoman issues a public apology 2 days later, and the mural becomes a symbol of defiance across social media under the hashtag Gardner Lineage. Meanwhile, Etta's memoir continues to shape discourse across the country. It is added to university reading lists. Activists quote her during marches. Her phrase, "I was not rescued, I was remembered," is etched onto protest signs and T-shirts from Oakland to Brooklyn. A playwright adapts her life story into a stage production titled The Woman by the Fountain, and opening night tickets sell out in less than an hour. During a standing ovation, Etta, seated in the front row, clutches Jordan's hand. She leans over and says, "You'll write your own story now. Don't let them reduce it to mine." And Jordan nods understanding at last that he is not a shadow of her, but her continuation. But then one morning in early winter the world pauses. Etta doesn't answer her phone. Jordan hurries to her apartment, heart thudding. He finds her sitting peacefully by the window, her favorite shawl draped around her shoulders, her journal open on her lap. Her hand rests gently on the final page. Her breath is shallow eyes, half closed, but she is smiling. Whispering, "The garden's grown," she says faintly, as Jordan drops to his knees beside her. "Tell them, keep planting." Her voice trails off soft as silk. Her eyes flutter shut. The city mourns. Vigils erupt spontaneously at her mural, her library, her fountain. People bring candles, flowers, handwritten notes. A nationally televised memorial is held at the theater where her play debuted. Leaders, students, formerly homeless elders. Even Nathaniel Prescott, now head of a major social equity foundation, all speak in her honor. But no tribute moves the nation more than Jordan's speech. Standing at the same podium where she once reminded the world of forgotten dignity, Jordan addresses the crowd with tearful clarity. "My grandmother didn't rise because someone gave her permission. She rose because she never stopped believing we were worthy of being seen, of being heard, of being held. She lived, so we'd remember every soul left out in the cold, and make damn sure the door never closed again. From that day forward, Etta Day is established in the city, an annual act of service where volunteers care for the unhoused, teach in schools, and create public art in underserved communities. A national scholarship is launched for Black women over 50 returning to education. Her face is placed on a postage stamp, but Jordan's most sacred act is private. Each month, he visits the original fountain where Etta once sat defeated and invisible. He leaves behind a single flower, and as the water ripples, he whispers, "Still I rise." The wind carries his words, and the city listens, because Etta Mae Gardner is no longer just a woman who was once forgotten. She is the beating heart of a movement, a name etched into brick memory and the bones of justice, a reminder that no life is too small to shake the world. Years pass, and though the city grows taller, noisier, more crowded with glass and ambition, the spirit of Etta Mae Gardner becomes something more than memory. It becomes a living force, an invisible thread that ties together voices, once silenced hands, once ignored, and lives once dismissed as unworthy. Jordan Ellis, now in his early 30s, carries her fire not just in art, but in every breath, every decision. His nonprofit Legacy Colors has expanded into a national network with chapters in 17 cities. It brings together formerly unhoused elders and at-risk youth, pairing them to create murals, music books, and new visions of the communities they both once believed had abandoned them. He tours the country not as a celebrity, but as a steward of her truth. At each stop, he brings with him a small cloth-bound book, Etta's final journal, the one she died with on her lap. And he reads from it, not for pity or praise, but as scripture, as revolution. In Washington, D.C., he is invited to speak at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where Etta now has a permanent exhibit. It is small, quiet, almost hidden, just like she once was, but its impact is thunderous. The exhibit features the tattered coat she wore her original teaching certificate, a clip from her viral video, and a plaque that reads, "She taught us to see what we were trained to ignore." As Jordan walks through it with his young daughter named Etta Grace, he kneels beside her and says, "She wasn't just strong, she was right. That's the difference." Etta Grace, barely 6, looks up and asks, "Will I be like her?" Jordan smiles, eyes glistening. "If you listen closely, baby, you already are." She touches the coat through the glass. Her tiny voice whispers, "Thank you, Grandma." Meanwhile, across the country, stories begin to rise like wildflowers in concrete. In Atlanta, a young teacher names her classroom reading circle the Gardner Hour. In Detroit, a formerly homeless man opens a free health clinic under the name Etta's Hands. In Portland, a retired police chief publicly credits her words with changing the department's policy on unhoused treatment, saying, "We didn't need more weapons. We needed more listening." And in the very cafe where she was once mocked, a brass plaque now rests above the counter. This table is reserved for those who were once overlooked. The owner. One of the baristas who once laughed at her, now a fierce advocate, having changed the entire shop into a pay-what-you-can model. But the most extraordinary change happens quietly beneath headlines beyond cameras. In shelters, old women begin to read again, their books donated through the Gardner Fund. Young boys in group homes recite her poems aloud during open mic nights. Artists of every color, shape, and age begin to paint murals, not just of Etta, but of their own forgotten grandmothers, aunts, uncles, neighbors. People who once walked invisible and now rise brightly colored on public walls like saints born from struggle. Then, one foggy morning in her hometown of Macon, Georgia, the university that once overlooked Etta's contributions invites Jordan to unveil a new statue, a 9-foot bronze figure of Etta Mae Gardner, standing tall hand, extended not in protest, but in welcome a book. In the other hand, her face captured in mid-speech eternal Jordan, older now, with salt in his beard, and strength in his voice, pulls back the cloth to reveal her. The crowd gasps. Silence falls, and then, slowly, applause rises like a wave. Students cry. Elders nod. A woman in a wheelchair reaches out and whispers, "I remember her. She was mine before she was theirs." And as night falls, Jordan walks alone to the base of the statue and kneels. He touches the cold bronze hand of his grandmother and presses his forehead to it. "We're still planting." "Grandma," he says, "you were right." They remember. Above him, the moonlight gleams against her bronze eyes, and though she is gone, the world she dreamed of, the one where no soul is too forgotten to rise. Lives on, years, continue to unfold, and while the city changes new mayoral terms, gentrified blocks, and blinking digital billboards, the legacy of Etta Mae Gardner becomes something deeper than memory. It becomes foundation. Her story is now part of school curriculum nationwide, taught not just during Black History Month, but throughout the year under a new education initiative named Voices of the Unseen. In the heart of New York, a towering public arts center breaks ground fully funded by donors whose lives were transformed by her words. It's called the Gardner Center for Human Dignity, a 5-story building dedicated to elevating stories of those who history tried to bury. Inside are studios for formerly incarcerated artists, counseling rooms for unhoused veterans, and a rooftop garden named the Fountain Sky, in tribute to the place where Etta once sat unnoticed. Jordan Ellis, now nearing 40, serves as its artistic director, but he avoids titles and press when he can. Instead, he leads quiet evening storytelling circles on the rooftop. No microphones, no cameras, just voices, candles, and truth. On one such evening, under a sky littered with stars, a young girl stands to speak. She's shy, maybe 10 years old, dark-skinned hair braided with silver beads. She clutches a notebook. "My mama said I could read this," she murmurs. It's called Letter to Miss Etta Jordans. Breath catches, the circle stills. The girl reads, "Dear Miss Etta, I heard what they did to you. I saw the video where they were mean, and then they cried and said sorry. I think you're very brave. I think when people are mean now, I can be brave too. I wrote a poem that says they didn't see her before, but now she sees through us all, like sunlight in old bricks, like music in silence." Her voice shakes but never breaks. When she finishes, the circle is silent. Then Jordan walks over and kneels before her eyes, brimming. "She would have loved you," he whispers. "She does love you through us." Far away in a small, almost forgotten town in Alabama, a man sits on a porch holding Etta's book in his lap. He's a former cop, retired now, and once one of the men who turned her away. He watches the wind move through the trees and murmurs, "I was part of the silence." Then he picks up a pen and begins to write not a story, but a confession. It becomes a letter, then an article, then a movement. Former city officials, business owners, landlords begin stepping forward publicly, recounting the moments they looked away. the opportunities they missed to show decency. It is not shame that drives them now. It is Etta's legacy that real change begins in truth. And yet, through all the tributes, buildings, broadcasts, and books, Jordan carries one last dream. Quietly, he travels to a narrow plot of land Etta once pointed out in an old family photo, a place in rural Georgia where her father had a farm long lost to debt and injustice. He buys back the land, builds a small wooden cabin beside the same sycamore tree his grandmother once climbed as a girl. He doesn't announce it. No ceremony, no press release. He simply brings his daughter, now 12, to walk barefoot in the dirt. Why here, she asks. Jordan looks out over the hills. Because this was the beginning. Before the city. Before the fountain. Before the fall. She grew from this ground. Now we plant again, and so they do. Tomatoes, collard greens, sunflowers, a single peach tree. Every plant tended with care. Every harvest shared with neighbors. And one morning, years later, a new family arrives, fleeing eviction, seeking a new start. They're taken in not out of charity, but legacy. Because the Gardner land is now a sanctuary, a place not just of shelter, but of story. And inside the little cabin framed on the wall are the final words Etta ever wrote, stitched in gold thread beneath a photo of her by the fountain. We are not broken, we are becoming. Remember that and keep building. And so, beneath the southern sky where the soil holds memory like breath, the Gardner land becomes more than a sanctuary. It becomes a living proof that healing is not a moment, but a movement. Word spreads quietly at first that a patch of land in rural Georgia has become a refuge for those with nowhere left to go. But, unlike cold shelters and broken systems, this place, Gardner Grove, functions differently. There are no intake forms, no judgment. Only a wooden porch, fresh bread each morning, a warm bed at night, and a sign above the front gate carved by Jordan's own hand. Come as you are. Leave knowing you matter. Families begin to arrive. An elder woman fleeing abuse in a city shelter. A single father and his autistic son who had been living in a car. A teenage girl who aged out of foster care with nowhere to sleep but a bus stop bench. Each one arrives fractured, and each is met with kindness, dignity, and something they had not known in years. Welcome. Jordan and Etta Grace now, a young woman with fire in her eyes and her grandmother's strength in her voice, run the Grove together. Etta Grace, just 17, speaks at national youth forums, not as a child of legacy, but as a builder of her own. She starts a podcast called Gardner's Voice, where she interviews people who were once invisible and lets them speak freely, uninterrupted. The podcast goes viral not for drama or spectacle, but because of its raw, unfiltered truth. In one episode, she interviews a man who had lived in silence for decades after leaving prison. His face weathered, but his words beautiful. Miss Etta, he says, voice quivering, was the only one who saw. I still had music in me. In another, a teenage mother tells her I was ready to give up. But the first night here, someone asked me my dreams, not my charges. No one had ever done that. Meanwhile, the nation begins to shift. Inspired by Gardner Grove, other dignity farms begin to appear, small parcels of reclaimed land backed by private donors and public pressure. They offer not just housing, but therapy, education, community, and above all, respect. Gardner Grove becomes a model, a template taught in social justice programs at Harvard, Spelman, and Howard. And yet, Jordan and Etta Grace keep it grounded. Each Sunday, they hold an open circle under the sycamore tree, where people can read, poetry, cry, sing, share confessions, or sit in silence. There are no titles, no roles, just human beings gathered in grace. One afternoon, as golden light spills across the land, an old bus arrives. From its steps, a frail woman, eyes dim, walking with hesitation. Her name is Lorraine. She's 83. She has no family left, no pension, and no home. But in her hand is a folded article yellowed from years in her coat pocket. It's the very first newspaper story that ran about Etta Mae Gardner, the one with the headline, "Homeless Grandma Shames Rich Man City Stunned." Lorraine had carried it for over a decade, saying, "If she could rise, maybe one day, so could I." Now, finally, she has arrived. Etta Grace meets her at the gate and says, "We've been waiting for you." Lorraine falls into her arms. No questions, no shame, just arrival. Later that night, as the stars bleed into the dark velvet sky, Jordan sits alone at the edge of the field, the wind whispering through the grass like old hymns. He opens Etta's journal again, the one she left behind, and flips to a page he's never dared to read until now. It's titled, "For the One Who Comes After Me." Her writing is shaky but steady. It reads to you, "Whoever you are, my child, my blood, my echo. Know this, I was not the ending. I was the bridge. Walk it boldly. Let your hands stay calloused. Let your heart stay soft. Make homes from ruins. Make justice from silence. Make love from the ache. And when they ask who taught you how to build a better world, say my name, but only if you've made room for others beside it." Tears slip down Jordan's face. He clutches the journal to his chest and looks up. The stars shine above like her eyes. The land breathes around him. The grove sleeps peacefully, and far away in the city, on a wall of a school named after Etta, a child finishes painting a mural not of a woman in rags, not of a viral moment, but of a grandmother made of stars and soil. Her arms open wide, her feet rooted in earth, her voice echoing through time. And in that image the world continues to remember, and in remembering it rises. And so, under the vast southern sky where memory grows like vines and justice takes root in the soil, the story of Etta Mae Gardner finds its final breath not in sorrow but in continuation. Gardner Grove blossoms into something more than a place. It becomes a movement, a map, a mirror, a promise. People from around the world travel just to stand beneath the sycamore tree, to touch the soil where dignity was restored, to feel the warmth of a legacy built not on wealth or power, but on love, truth, and defiant grace. And in cities where once she was mocked, statues now stand. In schools where her name was never spoken, children recite her quotes with reverence. We are not broken, we are becoming. They write it in notebooks. They whisper it before sleeping. They carry it like a shield. Etta Grace, now a young woman with fire in her voice and light in her stride, walks through Gardner Grove with her head high and her grandmother's voice alive in her every word. The podcast she started becomes a national radio series. The farm expands into 4 other states. Her father, Jordan Ellis, though older, now still paints at sunrise each brushstroke a prayer to the woman who taught the world to see what matters most. And when visitors ask, "How did this all begin?" Etta Grace smiles and tells them gently, "It began when someone finally saw her. And because of that, she helped the world see everyone else. And one day, when no one is filming, no one is watching, Etta Grace takes a tattered coat once worn by her grandmother and buries it under the roots of the sycamore. A new tree has started to grow beside it. This is how the story ends. This is how the world begins again. If this story moved, you don't let it end here. Hit subscribe to support stories that matter. Stories that shine a light on justice, dignity, and truth. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next powerful journey. Together, we keep these voices alive. Together we rise.